When we speak of the central figure of Christianity today, the name that comes to mind is almost universally Jesus. It is a name that has been etched into the very fabric of Western civilization, appearing in countless books, songs, and prayers for centuries. This name feels so fundamental, so deeply connected to the faith, that it seems almost unthinkable to question it. Yet, history and linguistics present us with a fascinating and undeniable truth. The man from Nazareth was never called Jesus during his lifetime. This is not a matter of theological debate, but a simple fact of historical linguistics. The name as we know it today simply did not exist in the language he spoke or in the world he inhabited. The primary reason for this is straightforward. The letter J is a relatively modern invention. It did not exist in the ancient Hebrew or Aramaic alphabets, the languages that would have been spoken by a first-century Jewish man in the Galilee region. Furthermore, it was also absent from the Koine Greek alphabet, which was the language used to write the books of the New Testament. The sound associated with J, as we pronounce it in English today, was not part of the phonetic landscape of his time. Therefore, it would have been impossible for his mother, Mary, or any of his followers to call him by the name Jesus. The name he was given at birth was different, rooted entirely in his Hebrew heritage. The name he was actually given was Yeshua. This was a common and popular name for Jewish boys at the time, a shortened form of the Hebrew name Yehoshua, which means Yahweh saves or Yahweh is salvation. The name carried significant historical weight, most famously belonging to Yehoshua ben Nun, or Joshua, the successor to Moses who led the Israelites into the Promised Land. By naming their son Yeshua, his parents were participating in a rich cultural and religious tradition, choosing a name that was both familiar and filled with profound hope. It was a name that connected him directly to the story of his people and their relationship with God. Understanding this distinction is not meant to undermine faith but to enrich it with a deeper historical context. It allows us to peel back layers of translation and cultural evolution to get closer to the historical figure himself. When we recognize that his name was Yeshua, we are connecting with him in a way that is more authentic to his own time and culture. It reminds us that he was a real person living in a specific historical moment, speaking a particular language, and belonging to a distinct community. This shift from Jesus to Yeshua is the first step in a journey to better understand the man behind the monumental faith that grew around him. In the ancient world, and particularly in first-century Judea, naming conventions were quite different from the modern system of first names and fixed family surnames. People were not identified by a simple given name followed by a hereditary last name like Smith or Jones. Instead, a person's identity was established through their relationships and origins, which were explicitly attached to their given name. This system provided crucial context, immediately placing an individual within a social and geographical framework. Without this additional information, identifying someone in a world of common names like Yeshua, Yosef, or Miriam would have been nearly impossible. It was a practical solution for a society built on kinship and community. The most common method for identifying a person was patronymic, meaning they were identified as the son of or daughter of their father. This is why the historical figure we are discussing was known as Yeshua Ben Yoseph, which translates to Yeshua son of Joseph. This immediately distinguished him from any other Yeshua living in the same village or region. This practice is seen throughout the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. For example, the apostle Simon was called Simon bar Jonah, meaning Simon, son of Jonah. The Aramaic word bar and the Hebrew word ben both serve the same function, linking a person directly to their parentage and family line. Another common way to identify someone was by their place of origin. This was especially useful when a person moved to a new town or was known outside their home village. The man we know as Jesus was frequently called Yeshua of Nazareth, or Yeshua HaNatzri in Hebrew. This distinguished him from, for instance, a Yeshua from Capernaum or a Yeshua from Jerusalem. This geographical identifier was just as important as the patronymic one, and was often used interchangeably. It grounded a person in a physical location, tying their identity to the land and community that shaped them. This is why the inscription on the cross, according to the Gospels, identified him as Jesus of Nazareth, King of the Jews. These naming customs highlight the communal and relational nature of identity in ancient Judea. A person was not seen as an isolated individual, but as a part of a larger whole, a family, a village, a tribe. Your name told a story about who you were, where you came from, and to whom you belonged. Understanding this system helps us see figures like Yeshua Ben Yoseph not as abstract theological concepts but as real people deeply embedded in their social world. Their names were their history, their address, and their family tree all rolled into one, a far cry from the simple labels we use today. The transformation of the name Yeshua into Jesus is a fascinating story of linguistic evolution, driven by the challenge of translating sounds and letters from one language to another. The journey began when the stories of Yeshua's life and teachings started to spread beyond the Aramaic-speaking communities of Judea and into the wider Greek-speaking world of the Roman Empire. The authors of the New Testament wrote in Koine Greek, the common language of the time, so they had to find a way to represent the Hebrew name Yeshua, using the letters of the Greek alphabet. This was the first and perhaps most significant step in the name's long journey. The Greek language did not have the letters or sounds to perfectly replicate Yeshua. The Hebrew name begins with the letter Yod, which makes a Y sound and ends with the sound Ah. However, the Greek language does not have a letter that corresponds to the Y sound, so the translators substituted an iota, or I, which was the closest equivalent. The SH sound in the middle of Yeshua, produced by the Hebrew letter Shin, also had no direct counterpart in Greek. The closest they could come was with the sigma, or S sound. Finally, it was customary in Greek to add a suffix S to masculine names to make them grammatically correct, so the Ah sound at the end was dropped. The result of these changes was Jesus. For centuries, Jesus was the standard form of the name used throughout the Greek-speaking Christian world and in the Latin translations of the Bible, where it was written as Jesus. The name remained this way for over 1,000 years. The next major change came much later with the evolution of the English language. For a long time, the letter I was used to represent both the vowel sound I and the consonant sound Y. It wasn't until the 16th century that the letter J was developed as a distinct character, created by scribes and printers to differentiate the consonant sound from the vowel sound, particularly at the beginning of words. Once the letter J was established in the English alphabet, it gradually replaced the I at the beginning of many names and words where it carried a consonant sound. This new letter took on the soft G or DZH sound that we associate with it today. As a result, the Latin spelling Jesus began to be written as Jesus in English texts. The pronunciation shifted along with the spelling, from the original Yeshua to the Greek Isus to the Latin Jesus, and finally to the modern English Jesus. The name as we know it today is the end product of a long chain of translation and linguistic shifts across 3 different languages and nearly 2 millennia. The widespread adoption of the name Jesus in the English-speaking world was solidified by its use in influential Bible translations. For early English Christians, the Bible was the primary, and often only, source for learning about their faith. The names and terms used in its pages became the standard, shaping theology, worship, and common language. Before the invention of the printing press, biblical texts were hand-copied and primarily in Latin, accessible only to the clergy. However, the Reformation spurred a movement to translate the Bible into the common languages of the people, making its contents widely available for the first time. One of the most significant English translations was the Geneva Bible, first published in 1560. This Bible was a landmark for several reasons. It was mass-produced, included theological notes in the margins, and was the first English Bible to use the letter J. Because the letter was a relatively new invention, the Geneva Bible was at the forefront of this linguistic shift. It consistently used the name Jesus to refer to Jesus, thereby introducing and popularizing this form of the name to a massive audience. It was the Bible of Shakespeare, the Puritans, and the Pilgrims who sailed to America, and its influence on the English language was immense. Following the Geneva Bible, the most famous and enduring English translation, the King James Version, was published in 1611. The creators of the King James Version continued the practice of using the letter J, cementing Jesus as the definitive English name for the Son of God. Because the King James Bible became the standard for English-speaking Protestants for centuries, its language, phrasing, and names became deeply embedded in the religious and cultural consciousness. Generations of people learned the stories of Jesus, prayed to Jesus, and sang hymns about Jesus. The name became so familiar that its origins, as a translation of a translation, were largely forgotten by the general public. This history shows how powerful translation can be, not just in conveying meaning but in shaping the very identity of the figures it describes. The shift from Yeshua to Jesus was not the result of a deliberate theological decision to change his name, but rather the cumulative effect of linguistic necessity and the evolution of language over time. Each translator, from the Greek scribes to the English reformers, made choices based on the tools their language provided. These choices, amplified by the printing press and the authority of texts like the Geneva and King James Bibles, had a lasting impact that continues to this day, making Jesus the name known and loved by billions around the world. Beyond the world of linguistics and translation, some have explored the name Jesus through a more mystical lens, suggesting that its form may not be an accident. This line of thought often involves gematria, an ancient practice of assigning numerical values to letters and words to uncover hidden or esoteric meanings. Rooted in Jewish and Greek traditions, gematria operates on the principle that words with the same numerical value are connected in some meaningful way. When this system is applied to the Greek name Jesus, it reveals intriguing patterns that have led to various interpretations, some of which are quite controversial. In the Greek system of gematria, each letter of the alphabet has a numerical equivalent. When you add up the values of the letters in the name Jesus, so that's I equals 10, E equals 8, S equals 200, O equals 70, U equals 400, and S again equals 200, the total sum is 888. In Christian numerology, this number has come to be seen as a sacred symbol representing Christ. The number 8 is often associated with resurrection and new beginnings, as Yeshua was said to have been resurrected on the day after the Sabbath, which was the 8th day of the week. The triple repetition in 888 is seen as amplifying this significance, representing the ultimate new beginning and the perfection of the divine. For many, this numerical value is proof of the sacred nature of the name. However, this practice of gematria has also led to more sinister and conspiratorial theories. Some have pointed out that according to certain gematria systems, the name Jesus itself, especially when manipulated or transliterated in specific ways, can be linked to other figures. For example, some fringe theories attempt to connect the name to Lucifer or Satan through complex and often inconsistent numerical calculations. These arguments often involve mixing different systems, Hebrew, Greek, Latin, misinterpreting historical texts, and making speculative leaps to suggest that the name Jesus was a deliberate corruption intended to lead people astray. Such theories are generally rejected by mainstream scholars and theologians as being based on flawed methodology and a misunderstanding of historical context. The most famous gematria number in the Bible is, of course, 666, identified in the book of Revelation as the number of the beast. Some have tried to link this number to the name Jesus, but doing so requires significant linguistic and mathematical contortions. The scholarly consensus is that the number 666 most likely refers to the Roman Emperor Nero, whose name, when written in Hebrew and calculated using Hebrew gematria, adds up to 666. The attempts to link the name Jesus to this number or other negative figures often stem from a desire to delegitimize Christianity or from internal disputes between different religious factions, rather than from a sound historical or numerological basis. With the knowledge that Yeshua's original name was different from the one used by billions today, a natural question arises: does it matter what name we use in prayer? If we have been praying to Jesus our entire lives, have our prayers been misdirected? This concern, while understandable, can be eased by considering the nature of prayer itself. Most spiritual traditions, including Christianity, emphasize that the power of prayer lies not in the precise pronunciation of a name, but in the sincerity, love, and intention of the heart. The divine, however one conceives of it, is understood to be beyond the limitations of human language. Think of it this way: if a child calls for their father using a nickname or even a mispronounced version of his name, the father still recognizes his child's voice and understands their need. He responds not to the sound of the word, but to the relationship and the love behind it. Similarly, when a person prays to Jesus with genuine faith and a sincere heart, the intention behind the prayer is what truly matters. It is the spiritual connection, the alignment of one's will with the divine, that opens the channel for grace, guidance, and communion. The name is simply the address we use, but the divine knows the sender and the content of the message. That being said, there can be a profound spiritual benefit to using the name Yeshua. Doing so can create a more intimate and historically grounded connection to the man from Nazareth. It strips away layers of theological and linguistic tradition, allowing one to connect with him as he was known by his family, his friends, and his earliest followers. Using the name Yeshua can be a powerful act of conscious remembrance, a way of honoring his Hebrew identity and the cultural world he inhabited. For some, it feels like a more direct and personal way to communicate, deepening their spiritual practice, and enriching their understanding of who he was. Ultimately, there is no need for anxiety or guilt over using the name Jesus. For centuries, this name has been a vessel for immense faith, hope, and love. Countless lives have been transformed through prayers offered in this name. The key is to understand that while Jesus is the name we have inherited through history and translation, Yeshua is the name he was given at birth. Embracing this knowledge can add a new layer of depth to one's faith. One can continue to use the name Jesus with love and reverence, while also cherishing the name Yeshua as a beautiful and powerful link to the historical reality of the man who inspired a global faith. Beyond Yeshua and its translated form Jesus, there are other names and titles associated with this pivotal figure that appear in various traditions and texts. One of the most important titles is Christ. It is crucial to understand that Christ is not a last name, but a title derived from the Greek word Christos, which means anointed one. This in turn is a direct translation of the Hebrew word Mashiach, or Messiah. In ancient Jewish tradition, kings, priests, and prophets were anointed with oil as a sign of being chosen by God for a special purpose. To call Yeshua the Christ is to make a theological claim that he is the long-awaited Messiah promised in the Hebrew Scriptures. In some modern spiritual and esoteric movements, particularly those associated with the New Age, Yeshua is sometimes referred to by the name Sananda. This name is not found in any ancient historical or biblical texts. It is said to be his soul name or cosmic name, revealed through channeled messages and spiritual teachers in the 20th century. According to these teachings, Sananda is the name of the higher consciousness or eternal spirit that was embodied in the man, Yeshua. While this name holds deep meaning for those within these spiritual communities, it is important to recognize that it originates from modern metaphysical sources, not from the historical record of 1st century Judea. Another name that appears in certain historical accounts is Isa. This name is found primarily in Islamic traditions and in a controversial 19th century text called The Life of Saint Isa, Best of the Sons of Men. In Islam, Jesus is revered as a great prophet, and his name in the Quran is Isa. The story of Isa describes a journey that Yeshua supposedly took to India and Tibet during his lost years between the ages of 12 and 30, a period not covered in the New Testament. While most mainstream Christian and academic scholars dismiss the Isa narrative as a fabrication, the name highlights the different ways in which Yeshua's story has been interpreted and integrated into various cultures and religions around the world. These different names and titles, Christ, Sananda, and Isa, reveal the multifaceted legacy of Yeshua. They show how his identity has been understood through different lenses: theological, metaphysical, and cross-cultural. Christ is a statement of faith about his divine role. Sananda is a belief about his cosmic spirit. Isa is an alternative history that attempts to fill in the gaps of his biography. Each name points to a different facet of his impact on human history and spirituality. While Yeshua connects us to the historical man, these other names and titles show the ever-expanding ways in which his life has been given meaning by people across the globe. Just as the name of Yeshua was transformed through translation, so too were the names of those around him, including one of the most significant figures in his ministry, Mary Magdalene. Her name, as it appears in English Bibles, is an anglicized version of her original Hebrew name and descriptor. Her given name was not Mary, but Miriam. Miriam is a classic and historically significant Hebrew name, famously belonging to the sister of Moses and Aaron. It was an incredibly common name for Jewish women in the 1st century, which is why, just like with Yeshua, a descriptor was needed to identify which Miriam was being referred to. She is known as Magdalene because she came from a town on the western shore of the Sea of Galilee called Magdala. This town was a prosperous fishing center, and identifying her as Miriam of Magdala would have immediately told people where she was from. So, her name was not Mary Magdalene as if it were a first and last name, but rather Miriam of Magdala. In the Greek texts of the New Testament she is called Maria he Magdalene. The name Maria is the Greek form of Miriam, and Magdalene is the adjective indicating her origin. Over time, as the texts were translated into Latin and then English, this became Mary Magdalene. Miriam of Magdala is a pivotal figure in the Gospels, often misunderstood and misrepresented in later Christian tradition. She is consistently depicted as a loyal and courageous follower of Yeshua, present at his crucifixion when many of the male disciples had fled, and she is the first person to witness his resurrection in all 4 Gospels. She is not the repentant prostitute that later church tradition, particularly in the West, made her out to be. This image resulted from a sermon given by Pope Gregory the Great in the 6th century, in which he conflated Miriam of Magdala with other unnamed women in the Gospels, including the sinful woman who anointed Jesus' feet. Recognizing her as Miriam of Magdala helps restore her true identity and historical importance. She was a prominent disciple, a witness to the most crucial events in the Christian story, and was referred to in some early Christian texts as the Apostle to the Apostles, because she was the one chosen to deliver the news of the resurrection to the male disciples. By peeling back the layers of translation and tradition, we can see her more clearly, not as a marginalized sinner, but as Miriam, a woman from the town of Magdala, who was a leader and a foundational figure in the earliest moments of the Jesus movement. The popular image of Jesus that dominates Western art is one of a tall, slender man with fair skin, long flowing brown hair, and blue eyes. This depiction is so pervasive that for many, it is the only image of him they can imagine. However, this portrayal has almost no connection to the historical reality of what a first-century Jewish man from the Galilee would have looked like. This image is a product of European artistic conventions, developed centuries later, reflecting the appearance and cultural ideals of the artists who created it, rather than historical accuracy. Based on archaeology, historical texts, and forensic anthropology, a more accurate picture of Yeshua would be quite different. As a Jewish man from the Middle East, he would have had features common to the people of that region. He would have had olive-brown skin, tanned by the sun from a life spent largely outdoors. His hair would have been dark brown or black, and likely kept relatively short and curly, in line with the customs of the time. The Apostle Paul even comments in one of his letters that it is a disgrace for a man to have long hair, suggesting that Yeshua would not have had the long flowing locks seen in Renaissance paintings. He would have been of average height for the time, around 5 feet 5 inches, and would have had a sturdy, muscular build from his work as a tekton, a craftsman who worked with wood, stone, or metal, and from walking long distances. Similarly, our mental image of Miriam of Magdala is often shaped by these same European artistic traditions. She is typically depicted with fair skin and either red or blonde hair, features that would have been extremely rare in first-century Galilee. Like Yeshua, she would have been a woman of the Middle East. She would have had olive skin, dark eyes, and dark hair, which she likely would have worn braided or pinned up, and covered with a veil when in public, as was the custom for women of her time. She would not have looked like a Northern European woman, but like the Jewish women who have lived in that region for millennia. Reconstructing the likely appearance of Yeshua and Miriam is not just an academic exercise, it has profound implications. The whitewashing of these figures in art has contributed to a historical disconnect, making them seem alien to their own heritage and culture. It can also subtly reinforce harmful ideas about race and divinity. By imagining them as they likely were, as Middle Eastern Jews with brown skin, dark hair, and dark eyes, we are not only being more historically accurate, but we are also reclaiming their authentic identity. It reminds us that the divine story of Christianity began not in Rome or Geneva, but in the sun-baked hills of Galilee, among a people who looked very different from their later depictions in Western art.
Like and comment. Don't forget to subscribe.